Thank you, Brian, and it's great to be with you this morning. And yes, I am a little overdressed, but I'm overdressed on purpose. Can I tell you why I wore a suit and tie this morning? We are at the Ronald Reagan Library. Anybody know that? And he was the first president that I really became aware of. As a matter of fact, I was in the 7th grade on the day that he was shot. I can tell you exactly where I was standing in the parking lot when somebody came running out the door and said President Reagan was shot. And so he made a huge impact on my life. He got me interested in politics and all those kinds of things. And so it may not mean anything to you, but I said, I'm going to be speaking at the Ronald Reagan Library today, so I'm wearing a suit and tie in honor of President Reagan. So that's what it's all about. Again, it's a privilege to be with you and with the BJU Press and Precept teams. I speak in a lot of different places around the country, but this team has Christian education on their heart as much or more than any other organization I work with in the whole country. And what an honor and privilege for all of us to come to this wonderful place at their request. And so thank you, Precept and BJU, for allowing us to be here today. Also, it's a privilege to have a couple of our Renew Nation board members here. Dr. Glenn Schultz, you'll be hearing from him tomorrow. And I just saw Dr. Larry Daugherty sitting right here in front of me. He's here to report on me to the board, so I better do okay. You know, he's right there in front of me. But again, it's so great to see you this morning. And they told me I have to kind of be teacherly today. And so if it slips over and it looks like I'm preaching, I am not preaching. I am only passionately teaching. Do you understand? Okay, so that's what's happening up here today. Actually, the presentation I'm going to give today is probably not necessarily one, if these guys had just said, come give us a presentation, probably not the one I would have picked, because I give this mostly to non-believers. Now, I don't mean non-Christians. I'm talking about people who do not believe in Christian education, okay? And I do this over and over again in churches and other settings around the country. And God is helping, and people are joining our cause, and it's exciting. But some of the guys from Precept heard me speak somewhere and said, we want you to share that. And so I've been at a number of these conferences and been privileged to share what I'm going to share with you this morning. So I hope, even though I know I'm speaking to the choir this morning, I hope it will encourage you, motivate you. I've got to believe that some administrator or teacher has come to this conference, and on the outside, you smile and shake hands and act like everything's wonderful. But there's got to be some teacher, administrator, probably multiple teachers and administrators who are here this morning, and you're facing the battle. And if you were to stand up, if we were to say, stand up, everybody, and share your heart, we might not exactly want to hear everything that's on your heart this morning. And so I hope and pray that as I speak and then as the other speakers come over the next couple of days, that you will be encouraged, you'll be remotivated and challenged, and you will understand once again why the work that you are involved in is absolutely so critical in our day and age, all right? And so I want to say to you that if you're involved in Christian education, you are one of my heroes. You're not quite to Ronald Reagan's level yet. But honestly, I'm being dead serious. You are doing the hard, dirty work of trying to change a culture one child at a time. And there's no greater work in this country than Christian education. And so thank you so much for the great work that you are doing. I like to ask people, as I'm speaking around the country, what is our most valuable possession? I have pastored for almost 20 years, and so I saw all kinds of individuals who were committed to their possessions. Many thought their job, their bank account, their next vacation, their huge house on the lake, their boat, they thought those things were their most valuable possessions. I saw not long ago on the internet, did anybody see the picture of the man who was buried on his Harley-Davidson motorcycle? Anybody see that? Some of you have absolutely missed out in life. Get on Facebook more, okay? I mean, come on. This guy, he loved his Harley-Davidson so much that when he died, he made arrangements, and they dressed him in all of his garb with his helmet on, his gloves, his jackets, everything, his boots. They set him up on, thank God for rigor mortis, I guess, but they set him up, they set him up on the motorcycle, and they got him locked in, and they put a glass case around him on a flatbed truck, and they drove this gentleman all through his hometown. That was his final farewell to his city. You know what I said about that? What a waste of a beautiful Harley, because they buried the guy in the glass case on the Harley. What a shame. But what's a greater shame is that man thought that something as temporal as a Harley was perhaps his greatest possession. And obviously that Harley's not doing him any good. If he did not know Christ, that Harley's doing him no good whatsoever. And 50 or 100 years from now, it'll be nothing but a pile of rust in the ground. He thought that was his most valuable possession. Obviously, we know what our most valuable possessions are. Our children are our most valuable possession. You want to get somebody ticked off at you, and all of you who work in education know, just mess with somebody's perfect little child, And I know it's amazing. We had a wonderful school that I started in 2002. And I did not know there were so many perfect children until I started Parkway Christian Academy. They came out of the woodwork. And amazingly, none of them had hardly ever done anything wrong. And when they got to our school, it was the first time they'd ever done anything wrong in their life. And they couldn't understand how this school had messed their child up so bad. But obviously, we all know that our children are our most valuable possession. This is my daughter, Heidi, on the left there. She's 18 years old. She's a freshman in college. My wife, Michelle, and then our 21-year-old daughter, Juliana, who is a senior in college. And I promise you, these are my most valuable possessions. This is Heidi and Juliana on the left. That's on her first day of school in Hollywood, Florida. And then there's Heidi on her kindergarten graduation day. Anybody remember those days with your kids? I was beaming. I was so proud. I was telling my kids were the most brilliant children in the whole world. My mom and dad have 41 grandkids, and these are the top 2 in the whole bunch, I promise you. This is Juliana in 2011, the day she graduated from high school, and this is Heidi just back in May on her graduation day. And you know what I understand? What these girls learned between their kindergarten year and their 12th grade year has largely determined who they are today. It never ceases to amaze me that people think that somehow education doesn't make a massive impact upon how a child thinks. And there are millions of Christians who believe that. I run into them all the time. This is a picture of him over in Africa just a couple of months ago. That little boy that Heidi's kissing there, isn't that adorable? That's why I showed it, because I knew it was adorable. But anyhow, that's Juliana with a bunch of kids. These girls, they've been on 9 mission trips to get total. And literally, when they go over there, they don't want to come home. I was a little worried that my 21-year-old was going to skip her senior year of college and just stay in Africa. I mean, her heart was bleeding for these children. But you don't want to know why? I'm not here to just brag on my kids. That'll wear you out in a heartbeat. But you know why their heart beats for these needy children? And why Juliana has a call to be a missionary? I know that I'm going to Africa to visit her in the future. As a matter of fact, I've told my daughters, when I get old, don't you ever put me in a nursing home. And my youngest daughter, Heidi, says, no problem, Dad. We're going to ship you to Africa, and she's going to hire a lady over there to take care of you in Africa where she lives. That's what I've been told. It's because the labor's cheap, according to them. But anyhow, Juliana's studying to be a missionary. Heidi wants to be a first grade teacher in a Christian school. And they love Jesus, and they love his work, and they love his cause because of what we taught them from the time they were born until they graduated from high school. Early on, my wife and I had to determine who we would allow to influence our children. I remember when they were first born. You remember how many of you remember the day you held your firstborn child? Can you remember the day? Those of you who didn't raise your hand, we'll pray for you. You have Alzheimer's or it wasn't a good experience. But anyhow, seriously, I remember when Juliana was born and what an awesome moment. And then Heidi came along, and again, the 2 most beautiful babies ever to be born in the history of mankind. I don't know how I lucked out. The greatest grandchildren, the greatest looking babies. But anyhow, and And I promise you, had you in any way tried to hurt my children when they were little, even today, but if you'd done anything to try to hurt my child, I'm not really that big of a guy. I'm 6'3". Until I was 15 years old, I was 5'2", and I weighed about 95 pounds. I felt like a he-man in high school. But anyhow, God intervened, and I grew to 6'3", and I weighed 105 pounds after that. But anyhow, I'm not that big of a guy, but I'll tell you something. There was something that welled up inside of my soul from the day my girls were born, and I said, I will physically protect them no matter what it takes. I moved to Hollywood, Florida, inner city church, inner city home, drug addicts, alcoholics running up and down the streets around my house. It was scary. I was born and raised in Indiana, and God calls me my first church into the hood, and I was scared to death, to be perfectly honest with you. So I am from Indiana, and I do have one big 12-gauge shotgun. So I loaded that baby with 5 shells, and I kept it right beside my bed because I was determined I was going to protect my children. I'll never forget one night that we were sound asleep, and I slept kind of with one eye open down there. There was all kinds of crazy stuff going on outside my house, and something started clanging and banging. My wife likes antiques, so she's jacked our bed up about that much higher than it should be, and I fell off the bed. I grabbed my 12-gauge shotgun, I pumped one in the chamber, and I was sitting there like this when my wife woke up with the gun going right over her legs. And she screams, "What are you doing? Put the gun down. You're going to shoot Juliana." And I might have if she'd walked through that door. But anyhow, we looked around the house, and a cup had blown off the windowsill in the bathroom and bounced in the bathtub. And that's what scared me, and I would have blown that cup to pieces if I'd have seen it moving. But I made my mind up I was going to protect my kids physically. And I think every single parent who ever holds their child feels that way. And yet, they get to 4 or 5 years old. We take little Johnny or Susie by the hand, and we walk them down to a school that does not share our values. And we turn their mind over for the next 13 years to people who teach them that what we're trying to teach them is not accurate and true. So my wife and I, in Hollywood, Florida, Juliana was going into first grade, and we didn't even think about putting her in the local public school there because it was very dangerous in so many ways. And so, but when we moved to Virginia in 2000 and Juliana was going into second grade, I had an open mind. I thought, okay, it's different up here. I'm in a rural area, and one of my church board members was a county commissioner. And in a board meeting one night, I said, okay, guys, tell me, what's the best Christian school to enroll Juliana into? And one of my church board members, the county commissioner, looked at me and said, why would you waste your money on a Christian school? And one of the reasons some of your schools don't have as many kids as you'd like for them to have is because you have far too many church board members that think like that. And far too many senior pastors, frankly, who think like that. So it took me back a little bit. Being a county commissioner, he was in charge of the Bedford County public school system. He was one of the guys in charge of it. And so he said to me, Jeff, listen, you don't understand. This isn't South Florida. All of our public schools up here are pretty much like Christian schools. He said, we've got tons of Christian teachers. And if you'll go right down here to Stewartsville Elementary School, you'll find out that it's not what you think it is, Jeff. Well, again, I'm coming from the inner city of South Florida. I'm thinking, okay, maybe this guy's telling me the truth. I don't know, so I'll go check it out. My wife and I went down to Stewartsville Elementary School, literal country school. I mean, smallest you can imagine. And when I walked in, the vice principal came out to do the interview. And I noticed she had a new age symbol dangling from her ear. That brought up a little red flag, but I don't want to judge people, Maybe she's a new convert, and she's one of the new converts here. The other teachers, all the other Christian teachers, led her to the Lord, and she doesn't yet know what that symbol means. And so I was open-minded, and we started talking, and somewhere in the course of the conversation, I said to her, do you teach any kind of sex education to second graders? And she said, as a matter of fact, we do. I said, okay, could I see your text? I want to see what exactly you're going to be teaching my daughter. And I don't know that it was sinister, but she couldn't come up with the textbook. I couldn't see the material. So it was going pretty far south by this time in my own mind. I was trying to be nice. I was a brand new pastor in the community. The county commissioner sent me down there. I didn't want to mess this interview up, but it just took me a few minutes to determine this lady does not possess a biblical worldview. And actually, one of the things she said about sex education, she said, Jeff, what happens is if you can object to it, and your child doesn't have to go to that class, we'll hold him out of the class and then reunite him with all the second graders after all the others have gone to sex education class. You know what the first thing that came to my mind when I heard that? Great. Now all the second graders will teach my daughter sex education. So I thanked the dear lady, walked out the front door, and looked at my wife and said, over my dead body, will this lady be in charge of my daughter's education? And I made the commitment once and for all to Christian education at that time. Quickly, there are 4 major influences as I see it on children in our culture. The home and the family should be the dominant influence. However, in far too many situations, it's either not the dominant influence or it's the dominant negative influence. Most parents, most Christian parents, are doing hardly anything to teach their children serious biblical worldview to offset the secularism that they're receiving in their school settings. And so I wish the home and the family was a dominant influence, but in my opinion, in most cases in America, it's not anywhere near the dominant influence. The church ought to be a dominant influence. But if a child goes to church 3 times a week from 6 to 18 years old, they'll spend a couple thousand hours at church, and most kids don't go 3 times a week. They'll spend a couple thousand hours, and you got to deduct 1,000 hours for pizza parties when they're in the teen group, okay? So you really only get 1,000 hours of instruction, and they get the David and Goliath story about 334 times in those years. So I wish I could say the church is a dominant influence, but as I'm speaking around America, I have 2 ministries. I mean, Renew a Nation is the dominant ministry of my life, but unfortunately or fortunately, I have a preaching ministry because of my pastoral experience, and I preach in churches all the time. Many weekends preceding this, I've been preaching, and it opens the door for me to talk to them about education. It's an amazing opportunity for me. But I notice that the teens in the churches are not being impacted. 2 weekends ago, I was in Richmond, Virginia speaking, and the worship leader, his 18-year-old son, everybody in the church let me know, now he's the most rebellious young man. He wants nothing to do with this stuff. He's rebellious, he's this, he's that. And I hear that all the time. And that was a main member in the church. So the church is not doing too great. The culture and the media is doing a great job of influencing our children. I don't hold to this fast and hard, but I read an article not long ago, and they were doing some research, and they said between 6 and 18 years old, the average child in America today will spend between 15 and 20,000 hours watching television, movies, surfing the internet, listening to music, and playing video games. 15 to 20,000 hours. Now that's mind-boggling, and I'm sure that none of us let our kids do that, I hope. But the fact of the matter is, even those of us, if your kid has a smartphone, they're dealing with the media all day, every day, I promise you. And then the school, and some of these things, I shipped this keynote to these guys, and it didn't come out on their computer just right, so excuse that. But the school and education is a dominant influence. Thanks to Ed Gamble, he first gave me these numbers some time ago, but a child from kindergarten to 12th grade will spend approximately 16,000 hours in school. So between the culture and media and school, a child spends over 30,000 hours from 6 to 18 years old. Now you tell me, who's having the greatest influence on our children in America today? I think all of us would agree that the culture and media is pretty much in many ways a negative influence, and yet I think we've greatly underestimated the power of education. It kind of blows my mind, to be honest with you. As I travel and speak, I constantly get arguments from senior pastors who tell me that it doesn't really matter whether a child receives a Christian worldview education or not. It doesn't make a difference. As you'll see in a moment, the statistics don't tell us that. And I don't know why they're so passionate about it. But education is one of the most powerful influences in our kids' lives. We know these scriptures. You got them all memorized. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. Deuteronomy 6, he basically said, listen, You teach your children my truth all day, every day. That's what God said to us, okay? And again, to give their minds to someone who will not teach them God's truth for 16,000 hours, in my view, seems like a direct disobedience to this command right here. Every great leader in world history understood the power of education in the mind and on the mind and hearts of a child. Abraham Lincoln said, "The philosophy of the classroom in this generation will be the philosophy of politics, government, and life in the next." And again, I don't know. I speak in so many different places. I never know what side of the political landscape people are on. But some people around the country are concerned about the direction of our country right now. And they ask me, they say, "Jeff, how did we get to this place?" I don't know. Some people say, "I can't believe Americans would elect these different officials who believe so anti-Christian." And I look at them, and it's a no-brainer to me. I said, "Are you kidding me? We've been teaching 2 or 3 generations of children to believe what our leaders today believe." And I don't know if you picked up the newspaper at the hotel this morning, but did you see the front of the newspaper? All right, there you go. If you didn't, go look it up. Aristotle said, "All who have meditated on the art of governing mankind have been convinced that the fate of empires depends upon the education of youth." Hitler, Soviet communism, Castro, China, North Korea all understood or understand that indoctrinating children is the key to maintaining their erroneous forms of government and thinking. And as far as I have been able to determine, every Muslim state in the world teaches the Islamic religion in their schools. Why is that? Because they want their children to believe in the Islamic faith. And yet we cannot teach our children in America's schools the truth about Christianity, which is the religion of our heritage. Since I find so many Christian parents and pastors who seem to think that it doesn't matter where a child spends 16,000 hours of their growing up years, I like to ask them the following question. I've been asking this question all over the country. I've been asking, how many of you would allow your child to attend an Islamic school? I asked them, okay, so let's just say the school was going to be right down the street from your house. It was a brand new, gorgeous building, and it's tuition free, and every child who goes to that school is guaranteed a full ride to Harvard. How many of you Christian parents would allow your child to attend that school? I haven't found one taker in the country, so I try to get a little sweeter. How many of you allow your child to go to a Hindu school? How about a Mormon school? We've all got great Mormon friends, and we love them, and they are great family people. But I can't get any Christian parents in America to say that they would place their child in an Islamic school, a Hindu school, or a Mormon school. And I asked them, why not? And they say, because we want our children to grow up and be Christians. We don't want them taught in another faith every day at school. And yet, they wouldn't do that. But millions of Christian students are being trained every day in the religion of secular humanism or secularism. And here's what I'm trying to help pastors and parents to see. That education is never neutral, ever. I had Phyllis Schlafly speak for me about a year ago, and she's not really pro-Christian school as much as I am by any stretch, but I had her for various reasons. And the one thing she said that stood out to me, because she's been such a huge proponent of Christians staying in the public schools, but she knew who we were, and so she spoke for us. But the one thing she said that stood out to me that day was she said, public education, when I was growing up, was fairly neutral towards religion. I don't know if that was true or not, but that was her opinion. And Phyllis Schlafly stood before a large congregation and said, today, public education is no longer neutral. Well, that's a no-brainer, but I'm glad that she said that. John Dunphy said, the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity. Charles Potter said, education is thus the most powerful ally of humanism, and every American school is a school of humanism. What can a theistic Sunday school meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children do to stem the tide of the 5-day program of humanistic teaching? They know exactly what they're doing. I can't understand why we don't know what they're doing. I've been asking this question across the country. How much falsehood is too much? Okay? Would you allow your child to attend a school if the school taught the following things? 2 plus 2 is 7. Now, I like to ask him, what if you had a little Johnny and he was going to kindergarten and he came home from school one day and he said, Mommy, I'm learning how to add. And 2 plus 2 is 7, Mommy. I said, well, you'd know that your little Johnny's a little slow. And just like boys can be in kindergarten. And you'd say, well, Johnny, it's not 7, but buddy, that was a wonderful effort. But what if he kept coming home for 2 or 3 weeks in a row and saying, Mommy, 2 plus 2 is 7? You'd get a little worried at some point, wouldn't you? And so all of us, if our little Johnny was in kindergarten, we'd go down to the kindergarten teacher and we'd say, listen, ma'am, you're doing an amazing job with Johnny. He loves the classroom. He's so excited about school, but he's not picking up on addition yet. And he keeps telling me 2 plus 2 is 7. I know you're teaching him it's 4, but I like to ask parents, what would you do if the kindergarten teacher looked at you and said, no, in this school, 2 plus 2 equals 7. I said, I know exactly what you'd do. You'd grab little Johnny and you'd look at her like, okay, she's crazy. You'd grab little Johnny, you'd walk straight down to the principal's office and say, sir, you have a major problem. Or ma'am, you have a major problem down here. This lady's teaching my kid that 2 plus 2 is 7. I'd like to ask him, what would you do if the principal looked at you and said, in this school, 2 plus 2 is 7? I said, I know exactly what you do. The same thing I'd do. I'd take my little Johnny and say, hey, y'all have a nice life. I'm out of here. I'm going to find a school that actually teaches addition. All of us would pull our little Johnny out. What if they were teaching George Washington was the king of England? Turtles are faster than cheetahs. America was defeated by the Nazis, or the law of gravity does not exist. If they were teaching any of these things, every parent I talk to tells me they would take their kid out of that school. What if they taught these falsehoods? God is irrelevant, even non-existent. The Bible cannot be trusted. I have some Christians who try to debate with me whether or not this is being taught. It's not a hard debate. God did not create the world. Sex outside of marriage is expected. I gave this talk a couple weeks ago somewhere, and a 22 or 3-year-old young lady came up to me and said, I just want to tell you something. That's exactly what they taught me in school. She said in health class, they told us how to do it, how to be safe. And she said, I literally raised my hand. I was the only kid in the whole class. I raised my hand and said, I'm not doing that before I get married. And she was thought of as a complete and total weirdo. What if they were talking same-sex marriage is good and normal? What if they were teaching? So I say to parents, if your school was teaching 2 plus 2 is 7, you'd pull them out. But if they were teaching these things, it doesn't bother you. And I will say this, I'm talking to the choir today. It's a lot more challenging when I'm not talking to the choir, but I'll tell you this much. That crowd is as quiet as you are when I get done with this argument. Does it matter which worldview our children are taught? Does it really matter? I want to show you a video that a friend of mine, Christian Overman, did just recently on the streets of Seattle. And I talked to Christian a week or so ago, and he was telling me about this video. And he said, Jeff, I stood out there for 1.5 hours. And he said, I interviewed every person that came down the street who would interview, and we did not find one person who mentioned God or the Bible. So I want you, he asked the question, how do you define right and wrong, and how do you determine the difference? Okay, this is his little video. It's not the greatest quality on the opening, but it's okay when they start speaking. Does it matter which worldview your child is taught?
Right and wrong. That's a tough one. Very basic, but very tough. Right, I think it depends on what your background is, what your moral set is. For me, it would be quite different than for someone else. It's the way you've been raised. It's the ethical standards that you've been held to or choose to hold yourself to. So I think it's extremely variable. Can't tell you.
You know, that's a good question. There's a lot of debates. If everyone knew what that definition was, I don't think there'd be as many political protests, you know, pro-choice, pro-life, all that good stuff. So I'm really not in a position to say what is right or wrong. I think right and wrong is a matter of perspective, really. Like, yeah, it's all perspective, really.
Okay. I guess this isn't something I ever really explicitly think about. Usually I just go with my feelings.
Yeah, and I think context matters too. I don't think there's any definitive right or wrong for anything. It really depends on the situation.
All right, so right is that which agrees with the person or group. Wrong is that which does not.
It sounds like such an easy question, but it's really not. This idea of what is right and what is wrong. I don't know. I want to say there's really nothing that's right and wrong, because anything could be argued as to be right just as well as it could be argued to be wrong. So I think people know what is inherently right or wrong within their own immediate reality. So in the general sense, it's hard to decipher. We have to, though. If we didn't, it'd just be chaos. Then again, it does cause a lot of chaos, too. So how would I define right or wrong? I guess I wouldn't define it. I'd let somebody else define it for themselves. So.
Going to a Jesuit school, going to Seattle University, they would probably want me to answer this well. But I'm just going to answer it how I think I should. I would say doing what is right would be measuring the impact it has on others. And if something goes too far to harming others, I believe that would be considered wrong. And I want to keep it broad, but yeah.
I think it depends on what you personally believe. I think if you go to different neighborhoods across America, they'll have completely different answers. So I think it has to do with your morals and your upbringing, but basically, right is what you feel good about, and wrong is things you know you shouldn't do.
It's basically just a stigmatic thing. You know, it's your social environment. It's right and wrong. Like she said, it's a neighborhood thing.
Right and wrong is basically a simple definition. If you feel what you are doing in your body, it tingles, you have to listen to your body. If it feels wrong, then it's wrong. If it's what you know in terms of the things that people told you that are right or wrong, you know what those things are wrong. But I think generally it comes down to sort of how your body reacts and what it goes through when you're undertaking that decision to do something. And if your body tells you it's wrong, then it's wrong.
So how do I define right and wrong? I really think that is a seriously individual question. And, well, I got to think about this quote that I read from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. What is right and what is wrong? Need we ask anyone to tell us these things? Not knowing, it's okay. It's not really that important to know. You go back to the question of right and wrong and spirituality and morals, and these things happen, golly, from so many doggone influences that it's really up to one's individual responsibility to define that, and more importantly, to live that. Did that make any sense?
You know, we laugh, but that's tragic. You see, a secular worldview actually leads to absurdity. Because the guy said, it's not really important to know what is right and wrong. Okay? So if I'd have been standing there, maybe I could have just taken my fist and punched him in the nose. And said, it's not important for you to know what is right and wrong. And I'll take some from the others and say, you know, it's a neighborhood thing. In my neighborhood, we punch people in the nose. And so it's right for me. It may feel wrong. You know what? My body didn't tingle when I hit you, so it's not wrong. okay? Matter of fact, I feel good about it. This is absurdity. These were intelligent people. And yet, secularism, which teaches there are absolutely no absolutes other than whatever we determine is absolute, it leads to absolute absurdity. And so I'm trying to tell parents and pastors all across America, it matters what you teach your children. All these folks actually do not live according to their secular worldview. They live according to the Christian worldview. Because again, the guy who said it's a neighborhood thing, if I brought my whole neighborhood over there and we said, we're going to attack your neighborhood because in our neighborhood, the rule says you can attack other neighborhoods. If I did that, he would go, that is wrong. You can't hurt us. And we could say, well, according to your worldview, we can because it's just a neighborhood thing. And my neighborhood believes it's right. See, they can't live by their own worldview, so they borrow from the Christian worldview. And I'm going to tell you something straight up. We are in the Ronald Reagan Library, and one of the reasons America has been such a strong nation is because of the Christian worldview and the absolutes of the Christian worldview. I was on an airplane some time ago, and I was sitting next to a Palestinian Muslim woman. And she loved America. And she said to me, she said, you Americans do not know what you have. She said, the rule of law is so strong in this country that you can drive from state to state without getting stopped and searched all the time and going through checkpoints. She said, you can feel safe and secure. She said, where I come from, we don't have that. Why do we have such a strong rule of law in the United States of America? It is because of our Judeo-Christian heritage and value system, and they can argue until they're blue in the face that that's not true, but secularism cannot deliver this nation. Secularism delivers the Soviet Union. That's what it delivers. I think Ronald Reagan would have liked that statement right there. I didn't throw it in for that, but if you're listening, Mr. President, clap for me up there. But anyhow, in Christianity, I tell parents there's something very distinctly different taught in a Christian school and in a non-Christian school. In the Christian school, we teach that God exists. He's the center of all things. The secular school teaches God does not exist. Man is the center of all things. The Christian school teaches God created the world. The secular school teaches the universe came through random chance. There is no designer. I have talked with some atheists, and there have been a few times when I've stuck my hand out and said, I want to shake your hand, and I want to congratulate you because you are a person of greater faith than I am, sir. And they quickly go, I'm not a person of faith. What are you telling me? I said, you're a person of greater faith? Oh, yes, you are a person of faith. I say, because it takes a lot more faith to believe what you believe than what I believe. So you're a person of great faith. Christianity, we teach children God created man in his image, and each child is born with a divine purpose. That's why the child born with brittle bone disease, the child that has ADD, learning disabilities, whatever it might be, the child like my Aunt Sherry who was born with Down syndrome has immense value in the Christian worldview because every person is born and created in the divine image of God Almighty. I'm not preaching, I'm just passionately teaching right now. The secular worldview says there is no ultimate purpose for man's existence. Do you know what the secular world, you know what the real purpose for living is in the secular worldview? And this is what you saw with some of these folks and what you see, why you see the narcissism in our culture. The secular worldview, really at the end of the day, the purpose for your life is to make sure you are happy. I had a woman walk into my office and she wanted to divorce her husband. She had a secular worldview. And she said to me, Pastor, I just wanted to tell you, she was from a very different background than ours, but she'd be coming to our church. She said, Pastor, I just wanted to tell you that I was going to divorce my husband. And I said, why? I said, has he been committing adultery against you? Oh, no. He would never do that. Is he beating you? No. He would never do that. I mean, is he not? What's the problem? What is your biblical grounds for divorce? And she said, well, I don't know if I have any biblical grounds, but I don't like him. And here's what she said. Actually, I picked up my Bible and I said, have you thought at all about what the Bible has to say about it? And here's what she said. Don't you think God would want me to be happy? And you know what I said to her? I said, actually, no. What God wants is for you to be holy, and when you are holy, you will experience true joy and happiness. But we have been taught in a secular worldview that my personal happiness is all that matters. That's why the divorce rate is what it is. That's why we have no commitment, because we're seeking the next thrill, the next pleasure. All right, I got a boogie. We got to get this thing done. The Christian worldview, we teach morality comes from God and is revealed in the Bible. The Bible is truth. Secularism, as we saw in the video, teaches morality is relative. There is no absolute standard of right and wrong. The Bible is untrue. Christianity, we teach God loves every person and cares deeply for humanity. There are no lost souls to God. There are no people who we could throw away, no matter whether in the womb that we discover they have Down syndrome or anything else. All life is valuable to God, or they're 70 or 80 years old, and we think that they are no longer valuable to society. No, God cares about every person. Secularism teaches human beings are on their own. Life is sustained by the survival of the fittest. The strong live and the weak die. In Christianity, we teach kids man is responsible for his actions and will be held accountable by God at the end of his life. Secularism teaches man will not be held accountable by a higher power at the end of life. And listen, you want to know one of the reasons why so many teenagers live in despair these days? We have taught them that they are cosmic accidents. We have taught them that there is no loving God who created them with a divine purpose. And so they come into this world and they're not in a wealthy family and they can't get a car at 16 like all the other kids in high school, and they're not a good football player and none of the girls want to date them or none of the boys want to date them, or they think they're fat or they think they're skinny. And because in a secular worldview where you're just a cosmic accident, where you're just a process of evolution, there is no one designing or behind your life, then all of a sudden you go, the universe dealt me a terrible hand. And we also teach them that you're not going to be held accountable by a higher power at the end of life. And then we teach them that we teach that death ushers kids into eternal life or eternal death and separation from God. And secularism tells kids death is the end of all existence. And so these kids are seething with bitterness. They're seething with pain. They hate life. And they believe this secular worldview. And so they think that I'll go and make all of those kids pay who were dealt a better hand by the universe, and then I will take my life and all of this pain will be over. What a horrible, horrible, horrible lie to teach to children. We don't do that in the Christian worldview. We teach every child, no matter whether you're tall, short, fat, or skinny, you think you're pretty, you think you're not, whatever, all of you are immensely valuable. I think of the little boy, Josh Beasley, who was in our school, and he was about 4 foot tall in the 12th grade. He had brittle bone disease. He was a little teeny person at 18 years old. And yet, in our school, he was the only kid in the whole high school. One of the members of my church bought him a beautiful golf cart. He was the only kid in the high school that had a golf cart. He could cruise all over the campus on his golf cart. It was awesome. And we loved Josh with a passion. And we told him from the first day we got him, Josh, God has a great future and plan for your life. I preached his high school graduation ceremony. And afterwards, I was standing there and I shook his hand and congratulated him. And I said, Josh, what are you going to do with your life? And here's a boy about this tall at 18 years old. And he looked at me with his big, deep, strong voice. And he said, Pastor Jeff, I am going to Hollywood to produce movies. I am going to change the culture of Hollywood. And I said, that's my boy right there. That's a boy, even though physically he will never have a normal life in this world. He had the hope that someday he'll get a brand new body, but his life is not a throwaway because he was created in the divine image of God, and God has given him a purpose. I got to hurry, I'm almost done. Is secular education having an impact on what we believe? You all know these statistics as well as I do. There are 78 million millennials. They're 14 to 34-year-olds now. They're born between 1980 and 2000. Tom Rainier interviewed the older half of them. They are on target to be the most educated generation in American history. They are on target also to be the least religious generation in American history. Only 20% of the millennials declare themselves as born-again Christians. That means 80% do not, obviously. Only 6% could affirm that they believed Orthodox Christian beliefs. Only 24% of the millennials are active in church. And more than 60% favor same-sex marriage. And almost 70% of the voting age ones voted for candidates in the last election who do not share our values, our Christian values. Is secular education having impact? You better believe it is. And we must wake up, and we must wake up the church. The statistics are all on our side. The most important question on this quiz is, which worldview is your child being taught? When I took the church in Virginia in 2000, a 17-year-old boy walked up to me. He was running our sound at the time. And he said, "Pastor, I don't want you to take this personal. I'd just been there a few weeks. I don't want you to take this personal. But as soon as I turn 18 years old, I will no longer be in this church." His mother and father had been in the church for 40 plus years. He had been there from the day of his birth. Faithful parents, faithful people. I asked him why, and he said, just with kind of a matter-of-fact tone of voice, he just said, "Well, I don't believe what my parents believe." And he'd been in secular education his entire life. I spent the next year that I had him there. His parents forced him to come to church until he was 18. And so I brought him into my office, and I talked with him over and over again about what it really means to be a Christian. And we got into apologetics and the Bible and everything else. And yet that boy could not believe the Bible because of what he had been taught in his school. And I'll never forget the day he walked up to me right after his 18th birthday, shook my hand, and said, "Pastor, it's been so nice to get acquainted with you, but as I told you, I will no longer return to church." He walked out of the church. He's gone on to become a chiropractor today. His mother would tell me when he was coming back from the college or university, she'd say, "He's coming home this weekend. This is going to be the weekend that I believe he gives his life to Christ." And I never had the heart to tell her, he's not giving his life to Christ because he doesn't believe a thing I say. And so I've been telling Christian parents all across this country, you can give a child a biblical worldview and they can still rebel in their heart and walk away from the faith. But usually, if you have their mind, even if you lose their heart, they will come home in their late 20s or early 30s. That was a pattern that used to happen in churches. But here's what I'm telling parents also. If you ever lose their mind, the chances of them coming home are very, very slim. This leads me to the vision and mission of Renew a Nation. Our vision is to transform culture by giving millions of children a Christian worldview education. I didn't start out to get into education. It wasn't a big dream of mine. I was a senior pastor, pastoring a booming church, planting multiple churches, having a great time. I did start a school that grew to 400 kids in 7 years, and I saw the massive impact it was having on our young people, and I loved it. And I thought, wow, that is a great idea for a church. It really works. It disciples those kids. And yet, in the end of 2007, God turned my life upside down and said, will you surrender to a new vision, taking Christian worldview education and the need for it to the masses? Our mission is to promote the cause of Christian worldview education by supporting and expanding Christian schools, Christian homeschools, and ministries reaching students in non-Christian schools. And I'm going to skip a bunch of this stuff right here. Let me just say this in these pillars. There are so many people in your community who want to help you do what you do, but they don't know what you're doing. Let me just say that. Renew a Nation just received we are the sole heirs to a 1,800 and some acre ranch with about a $10 million endowment. You want to know how we got it? The woman does not attend church. Somebody introduced me to her, and she said, this lady who introduced me, she said, this rancher has a vision that children will be on this ranch after she dies. I went and sat down with the rancher, and she said, so tell me what you're trying to do. And I told her, we're trying to give millions of new children Judeo-Christian values and principles. We're trying to change American culture by teaching children the truth. She said, what would you do with my ranch if I gave it to you? And I said, well, we would probably initially bring hundreds of children here every summer, and then we would bring thousands, and we would do biblical worldview camps all summer long. And in the spring and fall, we will do teachers' conferences and retreats. You can't believe this ranch. It is a piece of heaven. There are gorgeous homes built on this ranch. There's a river running through it. It sets in between two mountain ranges. It's heaven. It's in Tennessee. And the woman said, in a few short months, you got it. You're the ones. That's what I want to happen. She told somebody, Jeff understands my vision more than I do. She didn't exactly have a vision to give kids Christian values, but she thought it was a great idea when I explained it. And there are all kinds of people in your communities. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, I sat with the huge home builder in Roanoke, Virginia. We got into our Renew a Nation banquet in Roanoke last year. We have 7 affiliate schools there in Roanoke. We brought all the schools, and I had a little inner city African-American school. Their kids got up and performed. The man got on fire for that school and gave them thousands of dollars this year. Last week I took and showed him a video of the school, and he goes, when are you going to take me over there? I want to go see them kids. I don't think he'd been given anything to Christian education, but somebody lit his fire. All right, this is what it's all about, and I close with this. This little girl, Tatiana, when I was still pastoring and leading Parkway Christian Academy in Roanoke, Virginia, I was consulting with an inner city African-American ministry. I was helping their board. And as I was sitting in their boardroom one night, the Holy Spirit said to me, just tell them that you're going to give them 5 full scholarships to Parkway Christian Academy. You're going to, because most of their children came out of the projects, you're going to pay for everything, the tuition, the lunches, the uniforms, the books, everything. Just tell them to go find 5 children in their ministry they think need this and would do well. And send them to you. I decided that year to help coach my daughter's middle school basketball team. And I went in the gym for tryouts, and 23 little girls bounced into the gym, but none bounced higher than this little girl right here, Tatiana Crowder. I'd never seen her before. I didn't even follow up with it. I just put the school in touch with the ministry in the city, and they took all the care of the business. And so I said to somebody, who's that little girl? Who's that little Michael Jordan reincarnated running around my gym? And I'm serious, it was amazing. And they said, well, that's one of the kids from Acts 2 Ministries that you gave scholarships to. You know, we didn't give athletic scholarships, but sometimes when you obey Jesus, amazing things happen, trust me. And so I gave a little speech to 23 girls there, and I said, I can only pick about a dozen of you. And so here's the way it is. If you're not getting good grades, if you're not obeying your teachers and getting along with your classmates, you're not going to be on this team. So if you got a problem with anything I've just said, you stay afterwards and talk to me. And she was the only one that stayed. And she said to me, Pastor, I have just a little problem in one classroom. And so I said, who's your teacher? And I contacted the teacher, and I said, now, I've got this little girl, Tatiana, I met today, and she says she has a little problem. And she said, Pastor, she doesn't have a little problem. She has a massive problem. She's beating kids up. She said she's got a problem in every class. So Tatiana came in, and I talked to her, and I said, now, listen, honey, you can't be putting your hands on people here. And she said, no, you don't understand. My mother told me that if somebody touches me, I'm supposed to touch them back. And she said, them people have been touching me around here and stuff. And she was whooping kids, man. Make a long story short, we barely kept her. If it hadn't been for me, just the moment the little girl looked in my eyes, the Holy Spirit said to me, something big's coming out of this kid's life. And it wasn't just because of basketball. That didn't hurt, but it wasn't because of basketball. And so there were days she was so misbehaved that they would call my administrative assistant. I had nothing to do with the running of the school, but they would call my administrative assistant and say, if Pastor Jeff won't let us kick her out, then we're sending her to his office today. It's that simple. She won't listen to none of us. My wife and I spent a lot of time with her. After 2 years, she got saved, wonderfully saved. God's transformed her life in her sophomore year of high school right there. She led our school to the state championship game. That little girl scored 58 points in the Final Four. This is her today. It's just a few weeks ago. My wife and I went and picked her up. That's her 2 nephews that she loves so dearly. She's a senior at Liberty Christian in Lynchburg, Virginia. We shipped her over to Liberty because she got so good in basketball, we wanted her to be at a higher level of play. She texted me this last week, and she said, Pastor Jeff, don't you schedule a speaking engagement on May the 30th because that's my graduation day. And I said, girl, I looked at my schedule. I was praying I didn't have one. I said, girl, I don't have one, and I put your name on it. And then she said, also, I'm touring a college today. She's going to get a college scholarship for basketball. And she said, I want you to come over here on my signing day. I want you to sit there with me when I sign. You know something? This is what gets me up every day. Because this little girl, she was so hopelessly lost. She told me one day, riding in the back of our car, she said, Pastor Jeff, my last week of school in the inner city Roanoke City School, she said, they came to me at the end of the 6th grade and they said, Tatiana, you are so bad that next year we're going to put you down there at Noel C. Taylor. And that's the end of all things in that school system. When you go there, you're done. You come out pregnant, dead, on drugs. Something terrible happens to you when you go there. And then that little girl's voice piped up in my back seat, and she said, but then I got a scholarship to PCA. You know what I've been telling her now? I'm going to call you Dr. Tatiana Crowder someday And we've got a dream. She's going to go back into Roanoke, into the projects, and we're going to buy a building, and we're going to put a community center in there. And Dr. Tatiana Crowder is going to run that center, and she's going to save a whole bunch of other kids just like her. And she just told me last week, that sounds exciting to her. So listen, you are doing a great work. God has given you a tremendous calling. I know it is a battle. I know that we're not in the majority, but I'm going to tell you something. You look at biblical history, you look at church history, most of the time Christians were not in the majority. The people who were doing what was right were not in the majority. So don't you hang your head. Don't you be discouraged. You keep fighting for the soul of every single child in your classroom, and God is going to bless you, and your fruit is literally going to be out of this world. May God bless you.